Episode 2 of the Mr. McMahon documentary. This is where things start to get very spicy because episode 2 of the documentary starts to delve into the scandals of the early 90s that rocked the WWF. It covers the steroid scandal, it covers the sex scandal with the Ring Boys, with Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson. If you know about the history of wrestling, like I said in my review for the first episode, which if you haven't seen my review for that, check that out as well. I dropped it earlier today. And then it also covers, as I mentioned, the sex scandal, the Ring Boys, the scandal with Rita Chatterton, the referee, who claimed that Vince, told her to do sex acts for money to keep her job. And it covers sort of like the end of the 80s boom period. They talk about a lot of the stuff within the business as well. Like Bruce Pritchard is on here talking about, how Hulkamania's sort of boom ended around WrestleMania 6, which there's truth to that. I mean, you could argue before or after, but right around that time, there is truth to that. And, the thing about this episode is, there were at least 3 times in this episode where I had to stop and rewind to make sure that I wasn't just hearing things. Like, the absolute lack of self-awareness from some of these guys, and just in some ways, I don't know if it's arrogance or if it's just they're just not thinking. There's sound bites and sound drops and moments in this documentary where I just thought that I was losing my mind. So we continue on with the story. Again, I mentioned in the part 1 review, all the players are here. Dave Meltzer's here. This documentary, the first part of it, focuses a lot on WrestleMania 3. They do talk about the attendance figure dispute, because WWE has always said it was 93,000 people. Vince, Bruce Pritchard, Hulk Hogan. But Dave Meltzer has always said it was closer to around 78,000. And he was told that from Zane Breslov, who was one of the arena managers for the WWF and later WCW. And I think he actually worked in the Michigan area. I could have sworn he did. So Zane Breslov was a very well-respected man. Even though he gave Meltzer information, Bischoff, who hates Dave Meltzer, considered him a very close friend. He was a very well-liked man, and that's what the story is. So there was that, and then we started to get into the scandals, and there's interviews from when they were all on the Phil Donahue show. They talk about, and Meltzer was there as well, they talk about the whole thing with Phil Mushnick from the New York Post, how he would write these scathing articles that would lead to Vince McMahon's federal indictment, which was over the distribution of steroids. And the documentary hones in on that. Now, Hulk Hogan, who is not the most honest man in wrestling, says a couple things here that I found to be very, he was being honest. I mean, he actually admitted that when he went on the Arsenio Hall show and lied, which was, and many considered that was what started like the big landslide, was Hogan lying on the Arsenio Hall show about how he had only taken steroids 3 times. And they show footage of Billy Graham and Dr. D. David Schultz, who both claim to have injected him multiple times, each one. And that's where the whole sort of cascading started to go down. So all the scandals from the early 90s are covered here, and I'm sure we're going to go back to them when we get to the end, when the Janelle Grant story comes out. But they have footage of Rita Chatterton on the Geraldo Rivera show, where she was talking about the trauma she suffered under Vince. And there's a part where Vince McMahon in the interview says, no, it was consensual, and even if it was not consensual, the statute of limitations is up on that. And I'm over here like, why would you say that? Can you really be stupid enough to claim that you're innocent and then shortly after say, like right after the very next sentence, well, it doesn't matter, statute of limitations is up? That's what happens when your brain is thinking too fast and your mouth speeds ahead of your brain. Because why would you ever say something like that? That's very similar to like an O.J. Simpson thing when he would say, well, I'm innocent, but if I did it, it would go like this, like he did in that infamous Fox interview. Like, you can read body language, you know people enough to know that that was a Freudian slip. He should have never said that. There's a part where they show Vince talking about how he's cleaning up the WWF and instituting the steroid trial, and it's a scene from WWF All-American Wrestling. I'm pretty sure it was from there. And he's like, when you see this symbol, you can be assured that our athletes are drug-free or something like that. And then he makes this disgusted look on his face that did not air. This was a cut that did not make air, where it was almost like Vince was disgusted to say that, like a smirk, almost like a smirk, like a wink, like this is bullshit type of thing. And I watched it and I had to pause it and rewind it because I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't even believe it. Now, one of the other revelations that came out is that not only did Vince help out with Hulk Hogan promos, I never knew this. I always thought that Hulk Hogan came up with his own stuff. But we actually see footage of Hogan recommending lines for, Vince recommending lines for Hulk Hogan to say. Like, oh, mention this and like stack them up. And then he talks about it. And I had never known that. I always thought that the promos were all just the guys, you know, and that they were the ones coming up with it. But Hogan, again, in a very rare, seemingly honest moment, was like, no, it was all Vince. And so that shows why people have called him like an evil genius, because he came up with a lot of that stuff. Then there's a moment later in the documentary where they talk about the sex scandal, and they interview Tony Atlas. And Tony Atlas said, well, first of all, when they talked, they briefly glanced over the story of Jimmy Snuka and the murder that happened that was allegedly a cover-up, and like Nancy Argentina murder, which was covered on Dark Side of the Ring. And Tony Atlas says, we really abused women back then. And I was like, man, like, these are sound bites, dude. These are sound bites. So at one point, Tony Atlas says the following. He says, I never liked Pat because he used to grab my pecker in the locker room. And I was like, wait a minute. And I had to rewind it to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind. And by the way, I'm watching this early in the morning on September 25th. As of the recording of this audio right here, it's 11:30 in the morning. And I'm just like stunned that these sound bites exist in this documentary. Like, just absolutely floored. So they cover that, and near the end of this part, they talk about the WCW rivalry. They start talking about what happened in '94 with Hulk Hogan jumping over there and how he was going to go to Hollywood. They briefly talk about No Holds Barred, and they show some scenes from Mr. Nanny, stuff that Hogan did in the early '90s when he was still in good standing with WWF. But then they start going a little bit into like the WCW thing, which I kind of was expecting, although I didn't want them to go too much into. We've heard that story so many times. I mean, there are so many pieces on the WCW story at this point. It's just, I wanted to go past it, but it's important for this part. And Vince says that Hogan promised him he would never work against him. And he broke that promise because he went to WCW for more money, less dates, because he had 2 little kids at home, Nick and Brooke. They were very young at the time. And, you know, and then Bischoff comes in and he's like, well, he didn't even know if there would be a WWE, which there's truth to that, because during Vince's trial in '94, there were a lot of people that were wondering what was going to happen to the company. You know, The legend has it that Jerry Jarrett was considered to be the guy to take over the company while Vince was locked up if he was going to do time. Some people thought that if Vince did get found guilty, that it would be the end of the WWF right then and there. The scandal would just kill the company dead, and that if it was found guilty, that just it would be the end. And it didn't happen. Vince was found not guilty, which the cliffhanger of this documentary was Hulk Hogan was brought in to be the quote-unquote star witness for the government. And he was brought in to testify against Vince. And what happened was they gave him immunity. And when they gave him immunity, I mean, at that point, you just kind of, you know, I know why they did it, but he's not going to lie for you. Or he's not going to do what you want necessarily. It just depends on, I say not going to lie for you, but Hulk Hogan probably would lie. Because he lies a lot. But I mean, like, you know, when you give the guy immunity, you're kind of giving him a pass. And so he basically, the cliffhanger was, okay, I'm going to go up there. And then that was sort of the end. And then in the text on the screen, they revealed that Vince McMahon wound up giving Rita Chatterton, the referee who accused him, like a settlement payment in 2023. I don't remember hearing about this. I don't remember reading about this anywhere. I genuinely do not recall hearing that. And that was last year. So that's very surprising. That's the cliffhanger, is where's it going to go? Obviously, we know where it goes because Vince was found not guilty. Hogan's testimony certainly helped that. But this is the one that really begins the scandal. I enjoyed this episode a lot more than episode 1. It was way more interesting, and there were so many sound bites. There was like 4 or 5 sound bites that were just crazy. I mean, even hearing Hulk Hogan say, I've only taken 3 steroids, because the editing in these things is great. This is a great crew that's putting this together. And then shortly after, you see like Dr. D and Superstar Billy Graham, I injected Hogan at least X number of times, you know. It's just like great editing, tremendous work on the editing. Where do we go from here with part 3? Part 3 is probably going to be about the Attitude Era and Vince's sort of combat of that, so of the whole Ted Turner thing. So I will come back with a review probably tomorrow on part 3. Leave your comments on what you thought about part 2 of the McMahon documentary on Netflix, and I will see you guys real soon. I may drop a video about X-Men 97 later today. We'll see. But for now, take care.